From his reluctant name dropping of the Diamond to Coach Javier Mendez snubbing key fighters in his predictions, here's all the tea about Dagestani champion Islam Makhachev's toughest opponents in the UFC. Makhachev thinks his most dangerous fight could probably be with the Diamond. He's not super sure about it though, and why's that? Well, because the Russian fighter originally had a different bout planned for himself. After his absolutely dominant victory over Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 284 in February 2023, Islam had his eyes set on a new fighter, the American Beneil Dariush, who was going for his first ever UFC championship against Du Bronx. But unfortunately, things didn't work out well in that direction, as Dariush ended up losing the bout in literally the first round. Makhachev had been banking on the American winning, so that he'd have a chance to test himself against someone who had a good range of MMA skills in his arsenal. The Russian complemented Dariush's grappling, wrestling, and striking skills himself. It was clear he thought of him as a worthy opponent. To be fair, Beneil's won 8 fights in a row, so we get where Islam was coming from. After UFC 289, though, he's had to shift his focus to other fighters that he could face off against in the octagon. And the first on his list is none other than Dustin the Diamond Poirier, although there's no saying for sure if this bout is even gonna happen, since Dustin has his own match lined up at UFC 291. Makhachev basically just picked him because he needs a new name on his resume, and Dustin, with his big rep in the UFC, would make a solid match. I'm still a little salty about the missed Dariush opportunity though. That fight would have ensured a smoother trajectory for Islam. But now there's all this uncertainty surrounding his next fight, which just isn't a good look for Khabib Nurmagomedov's protege. He's wavered in the past too, though. The Russian named Charles Oliveira was his toughest opponent before beating the crap out of him at UFC 280 in October 2022. Yep, Islam definitely underestimated himself that time, before the UFC Vegas 49 main event, where he was originally going to fight Dariush, but instead ended up facing off against Bobby Green. Islam made a bold announcement. He said he wanted a title fight if he managed to beat Green in their upcoming bout. And since Oliveira was pretty highly favored to win his own UFC 274 match, that'd make them meet in the octagon for the lightweight belt. Makhachev was excited for this potential fight. In his UFC Vegas 49 pre-fight conference, he claimed that if this ended up happening, it'd be a great fight. Now, why was the Dagestani so eager to meet Charles in the ring? Well, according to him, it's because the two have really similar fighting styles. He said that the Brazilian had good grappling and striking skills, with the grappling being high level, making him one of the toughest opponents for the lightweight title. But like I said, Islam really just should have had more faith in himself, because he ended up dominating Oliveira at their UFC 280 showdown. As any UFC fan would remember, Makhachev took the lightweight crown easily in that bout. He took Charles down in round 1, and then eventually secured an arm triangle choke on him in round 2. It was kind of painful to see the Brazilian's 11-fight winning streak be broken just like that, but there's no denying that Khabib's apprentice brought his A-game. It was bad enough that Charles had to pull out the old "it wasn't me" card, saying that he wasn't fully present in the fight in October 2022. Come on, Du Bronx, do better! The Brazilian then ended up fighting Beneil Dariush and beat his American opponent, opening up a potential rematch opportunity with Makhachev. But guess what? Islam isn't too sold on the idea. I don't know why he's overthinking this, like he beat the Brazilian in their last bout against each other. He shouldn't have anything to worry about, really. Even Charles's grappling skills, which were a fear for the Russian previously, have proved ineffective against him. Plus, Oliveira's coach, Diego Lima, is pretty confident in his fighter's abilities. He's said that a match against Islam would be a shot at redemption for Charles, and that it's the only fight that makes sense for him. He's managed to defeat all the top-ranked lightweights, including the likes of Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier. A title matchup is what he deserves then, and Lima sees a total knockout on the cards if the fight ends up going through. The coach brought up the fact that his trainee is quite literally known as the submission ace, having a record for the most submissions in UFC history. And if he strengthens his attacks and brings the fight to the ground level, he's got it in his pocket. You can't really fault that logic. But Islam did have a brief retort for the ambitious coach, saying that there's still levels in the game. His fans have shared similar opinions online too. They've labeled Lima's statements as delusional, considering the fact that Makhachev had pretty much crushed Charles in their earlier bout. Some have even pointed out that while Oliveira is no doubt a strong fighter, his mindset may be the thing that caused him to lack at UFC 280 against his Dagestani rival. The fans even mocked the Brazilian and his coach's remarks about not performing up to par in the fight, calling their words excuses. Oh, and a user claimed that even if Makhachev ended up winning this potential bout, Lima would just say that the short turnaround from June to October caused it. Damn, the Makhachev fandom is brutal. An interesting link to Khabib Nurmagomedov was also made, which kinda is inevitable when you're talking about Islam. Some users believe that if Khabib is in attendance at the fight, then Oliveira has no chance of winning, especially because of the venue being Abu Dhabi. But if Khabib isn't there, the Sao Paulo native might have some chance of winning. I guess having your mentor there can help raise spirits, but surely not enough to shift your winning and losing chances. Islam doesn't seem all that excited about this matchup, as no further comments have come from his side. The UFC have still kept a fight decision for him pending, but that doesn't mean you and I can't speculate on who his next opponents could be. Now, Mateusz Gamrot could very well be a strong opponent against the Dagestani champ. Yep, the very fighter who Jorge Masvidal described as a future UFC champion in the making. It's pretty clear why the American top team member thinks so. Gamrot is a beast when it comes to wrestling, and his grappling power is seriously no joke. The Polish fighter has won several grappling competitions, along with winning gold in the European trials of the ADCC Championship. We all know how Islam tends to struggle with strong grapplers, so Gamrot might just bring the kind of challenge he needs to test his skills. The two haven't met in the octagon yet, which is perfect for Makhachev's new name on my resume demand. There's another fighter I'd love to see the Russian go against, and this one has locked horns with Islam in the past. Any guesses? Arman Tsarukyan. He faced off against the Dagestani in his UFC debut bout, and still managed to give his opponent a hard time. Mind you, he was only 26 at the time, but made things very difficult for the much more experienced Makhachev. In the striking field, he outshone Islam by far, and even initiated several scrambles. Him sneaking in a takedown was one of the most shocking Islam-Makhachev fight moments of his career history, too. This is exactly why a rematch between the two would be totally epic. Arman has grown as a fighter since then, and Islam has polished his skills too. So this time around, the two might be on a more even playing field. Now, these are just some general picks for fighters that may pair well with the Russian champ, but Islam's coach Javier Mendez has his own take on the topic. When asked about who he thought the toughest opponents for Makhachev were, the coach had some interesting insight to share. Obviously, the choice is between Poirier, Gaethje, and Oliveira, and Mendez leaned towards the highlight as the most well-matched opponent. He even mentioned specifically why he believes so, and it's mostly because of Justin's versatile MMA skill set, what with his powerful kicking and punching game, and ability to absorb punishment. So, basically, it's Justin's style that Mendez thinks might prove to be a big challenge for Islam. He did acknowledge Poirier's outstanding abilities too, though, and interestingly left out any comments about Oliveira. Sus. The fighter and his coach don't want to comment about a potential rematch. Clearly, Charles should consider other options. Anyway, there you have it, folks. From Coach Mendez's prediction about what's to come next, to Islam's reluctant name-dropping of Dustin Poirier. That was everything to do with Islam Makhachev's toughest opponents.